The DIESOL podcast.
Developing innovation in English as a second or other language.
Episode 82. Are idioms appropriate?
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 82. We are your hosts. I'm Brent Warner.
And I'm Ixchell Reyes. And
we missed the last
I'm
episode.
still in Taiwan.
You're still in Taiwan?
We did, because it was spring break. Yeah.
Oh,
did you have a spring break?
This is, I think, the first time we've skipped an episode before for when we put in little notes on it and did it once or twice, I think, like during Black Lives Matter and a few things like that. But I don't think we've ever properly just like skipped an episode fully, right? Not quite that way. So that was the first time. Let's not make a habit of it.
I know. I know. You all missed us, didn't you?
Yeah, we're regular like Bran. So
but we are back.
We're back. We're here. How's Taiwan?
Taiwan is getting more humid by the minute. I can say that I have now unlocked a secret achievement, and that is coexisting with scooters on the road.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah.
I no longer, because I have to drive here, and I no longer get panic attacks whenever I get to an intersection. Now they're sort of just there, and I'm zen with the scooters.
That is an achievement. You know, I've got my scooter, and I'm always worried. Yeah. So.
I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
there's a little bit more available here for scooters. I would worry about you in the States.
Well, yeah, for sure. Like
anyway, what about you?
In Taiwan, there's like tons of scooters, right? So it's kind of like its
own so it's like it's common.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have their own lane and everything. But you're getting ready to do something bold.
Oh yeah, I'm starting my packing. I'm getting ready to move to Japan. So I'm
moving to Japan.
Yeah, last time you were the one recording from Japan, and now you'll be back in the States, and I'll be in Japan. I don't know how long you'll be in the States for, but for a little bit.
The tables have turned.
Yes. So I'm prepping my move for my sabbatical project, and so that'll be good. And then a couple other things. We mentioned it last time too, but we launched the site AIandESL.com, and the response has been pretty good. I've been having some fun writing some of the articles and getting a couple other people to maybe potentially share. We have one guest post already on there, and so yeah, if you're interested in that conversation, because we don't want to make every DIESOL episode about AI stuff, but I am very forward on pushing and kind of exploring all that stuff, and so so that's kind of our little. Can we call it a side project? We called it an offering, a DIESOL offering.
A sister project?
Yeah, a sister project.
A sister project, a sibling of DIESOL.
There we go. Something along those lines. So AIandESL.com, and maybe we should have kept it ESOL because DIESOL is the ESOL. Anyways, there it is. AIandESL.com if you're interested. But today we're talking about we're going old school. We're talking idioms. Are you ready to get into a fight, Ixchell?
I'm ready.
Are you rearing like a bull? Are you chomping at the bit?
It's go time.
It's go time.
It's go time.
All right. All right, so Ixchell, idioms. You brought up this topic. We'll get in a little bit into some of the research, not a ton of it. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but let's start with why you wanted to kind of jump in and kind of ask this question of why are idioms appropriate to teach?
Yeah, well, part of it is my sister and I've talked about it before in several episodes, just a little bit when we're talking about the difference in the way we learn language. But my sister speaks in idiomatic language a large percentage of the time. And when I'm listening to her, my teacher brain or my judgy English teacher brain
Your
is
elite,
pointing out
snooty,
every
snobby.
yes.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, why did you say that? That's not clear. What if I were a language learner? I wouldn't understand that. And in my mind, I'm translating it to clearer terms. And I think it comes from being obsessed with writing clearly.
Hmm.
When I was in college, I was just so focused on making sure I didn't use cliches and making sure I wasn't using idiomatic language. And so it's just interesting for me because, right, as a language learner, my sister's a language learner. And how is it that she has taken all of this and now that's part of her lexicon and that's just who she is?
Hmm.
So, and of course, being language teachers, you and I will never escape the one student who will misuse an idiom in our conversation, but so proud because they're able to use it.
Hmm.
And so I think that's where my interest came from.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll dig into kind of the classroom setting, but let's talk just a little bit about the a little bit about the
Mm-hmm.
background of idioms and kind of understanding a bit about them. We grabbed a couple of research points, and again, this is kind of it's a little bit piecemeal because we're talking about different parts here, but just to kind of share some thoughts on idioms first. I did find this article from Rosa Elena Vego Moreno, and it's called "Representing and Processing Idioms." And actually, I started looking at it. I'm like, oh, we can't really use this for the whole episode because it's really about how the brain understands idioms and it's getting into it. But I just thought it would be interesting to bring up and share a little bit, and so I'll share just a part of this. A segment from the article, and she said, for many years, the standard way of looking at idioms has been to consider them words as lexical items, which are listed and retrieved as chunks from the lexicon. According to this view, there's no need to worry about idioms, no need for a complex theory of how to communicate with them. The motivations for claiming this are based on the belief that the meaning of an idiom is in no way recovered from the meaning of its individual constituents, and that idioms behave as syntactic as well as semantic units. That is, there is nothing in the meaning of, quote, the and kick and bucket that tells us that kick the bucket means die. And furthermore, there is no way, once we are familiar with the idiom, to break up its meaning into individual constituents of the string. So basically, what she's saying inside of here is there has been a traditional way of thinking that you're saying, hey, if I say kick the bucket, I can only understand that alone as death if I learn that separately. And then if we change that around, then there's no understanding of it. But that was actually, it turned out like later on in the article, she kind of got into it a bit and talked about how that's not really accurate, right? That's not really a proper way to think about it, because there are lots of idiomatic expressions that we might say in different ways, and maybe we wouldn't normally say them, but if we heard someone say it, we would understand it. So, so the examples that she gave, Ixchell, when you and I were joking pre-show a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
different versions of this. So it's like to spill the beans, right? Is an idiom that which by the way, I don't use it very often, so it'll go to your point later, but this is an example of spill the beans means to like let out a secret, right? But she gave some different versions of that. She said, the beans were finally spilled, or
I didn't spill a single bean.
yeah, don't look at me, I didn't spill a single bean, or something like that, right? And it's like, yeah, we
Hoard the
probably
beans.
well, we wouldn't say those things, but like we would still kind of understand them, even though it's not spill the beans, or we might even be able to say something like, oh, he gave up on life, that bucket kicker, or something like that, right? And that wouldn't really be normal, but we could kind of understand it with poetic license, right?
Bucket kicker.
Yeah. Are you a bucket
Sorry,
kicker?
that just sounds hilarious.
I don't know. I'm just making it up, but you get what I'm saying, right? Which is like you could still follow
Right.
along with it. And so her argument here is that the idioms. There's an argument that like, oh, idioms are, you just have to learn that phrase and it's alone and totally isolated. And she's saying, well, no, not really. It's like there can be different setups, and the way that the words are strung together could still possibly be understood. So she kind of spreads out from that. I don't know if you found anything that you thought was interesting in some of the articles that we were exploring here.
Another interesting quote is by De Caro in the article, The Advantages and Importance of Learning and Using Idioms in English. And the quote is, some idioms of the worldwide English have first been seen in the works of writers like Shakespeare, Sir Walter Scott, Lewis Carroll, or even in the paperbacks of contemporary novelists. An example of Shakespearean quotation can be found in the following sentence. As a social worker, you certainly see the seamy side of life. Biblical references are also the source of many idioms, sports terms, technical terms, legal terms, military slang, and even nautical expressions have found their way to the everyday use of English language. And I can attest to that because I've had to explain to students oftentimes, hey, why did we start saying hit the head for go to the restroom?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that one, Brent? Hit the head.
Isn't the head like in the Navy? Isn't that like the is that what it
Oh,
means?
apparently I'm the only one who didn't know this, but we had to. Yeah, that's exactly correct. And so, but yeah,
Hey!
it came up.
I got it. Give me a point. Give me a point. Give me a gold star.
You get a point because this was an older idiom.
Yeah.
So you just dated yourself.
Like an old person's idiom? Is that what you mean by that?
No, I didn't say that.
How dare you offend any listeners who are who knew that idiom and
Who
knew where it
understand?
came from? Yeah.
So again, this is a conversation that we've been having.
Yeah, for sure. So there's lots of different things to kind of consider in terms of idioms. You know, where they came from, how, you know, there are different parts. So we're going to get into this in the second half. We're just keeping the background just a little understanding of idioms to start with here. We'll jump over and kind of get into the conversation that you wanted to have, which is essentially that you want to ban idioms, right? That's what you're saying.
That's extreme.
Yeah, I'm taking your extreme view. I'm taking your view to the logical extreme. But we'll get into it. So let's
ban idioms.
let's jump over.
So how necessary and useful are idioms for language learners?
Yeah. So,
I think my opinion is it confuses the emergent learners. And I mean, you have to have a level of sophistication to be in your language use in order to be able to use them.
Yeah.
I suppose you would be able to understand some of them, but it might be even more confusing because they also have constructions that emerging learners aren't used to.
Yeah. So I do understand what you're saying here. So so your perspective, you know, is kind of coming from the like, hey, I want to be clear in my communication. We want to make sure. And then idioms are by default unclear because they don't mean
meanings are abstract often, or there's two meanings, the literal and the abstract, figurative.
Right. So I'm going to argue against that. Number one, students love idioms. Like students love idiom classes. We have idiom classes at our school and they always fill up.
They're popular.
They're super popular. Students want to go into them. I haven't taught that class at our school for, I don't know if I ever have. I've taught idiom classes in the past, right? And like they feel kind of easy because they're just like, hey, let's look at this term and let's learn how to use, you know, like it's kind of just like vocabulary. I mean, sorry, I'm not trying to minimize the teaching experience, but you know what I mean? Like where students like it because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it can be fun and it can be kind of lighter, but also the reason that I like idioms, and I think we're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to balance this conversation out a little bit, but idioms give a good insight into the thinking of the speakers of whatever language you're studying, right? And so how do these people think about the world? How do these people understand interactions? What are ways that they kind of view things through different prisms or perspectives? And that to me, like when I was studying Japanese, that was really valuable, like to go, oh, okay, like that's kind of like you kind of just get little little hints of the personality or the style of approaching the world behind idioms, and that's why I think that they're really important from my perspective. Like, yes, I do understand that some of them are unclear or people like stop using them, and it's very hard to know if, hey, is this a common idiom? Is this used all the time? Maybe here in California, people use some of the ones that are very different than they might use, in the South or, in the Pacific Northwest or, wherever else it is. Right. So
Right.
sometimes
They're
they're regional.
geographically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of why I think that they're valuable, but I understand that they're a little bit hard to parse out properly.
I guess some of of course, my experience shapes the opinion I have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly because of two things. Number one, of course, I'm a language learner, but I loved English. And I loved anytime there was an idiom, oftentimes I could assimilate it to something in Spanish because I would translate it in my head and I would say, like, oh, that's kind of like when we say blah, 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 blah. But then there would be idioms that made no sense because when you translate it, I couldn't understand. And so I would say, okay, I don't know what that means. But then I would guess from the context. But it never really became part of my lexicon or my part of the personality that I have in my writing voice. We always have a writer's voice. Mm. And so I was a kind of a stickler with myself about being clear. And so then, of course, as I'm getting older and when I became a teacher, I noticed that on orientation week, when all the international students come in to take their TOEFL test or whatever they're taking and getting their schedules, so many times I would see my colleagues get into some kind of misunderstanding with the student, and the poor student is sitting there anxious because they don't understand it's their first week and they're trying to figure out, they want to make sure they pay their tuition, they want to make sure they're in the right class, they have the right book, but then the instructor is using idioms. And I remember always feeling so bad for the students and knowing, no, you just have to say this and this and this. And so inevitably what happened at the beginning of my teaching career is the students would come to me and say, the teacher told me this. I said, oh, this is what they mean. And I would explain it in very simple, concrete terms. And I would never, and then I just made it a point, especially with the lower level students, not to use idioms. And if I were to use an idiom, I would always say, since I don't use them, I would say, you might hear some people say blah, 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 and this is what it means. Right. You can use it, you can try it. But I don't use it. And I will tell them, I said, if you feel comfortable, you can try it. And so that's kind of where my relationship with it. Yes, I think it's a relationship I have with idioms. Oh, yeah.
This is like a personal trauma issue for you around idioms. So, but I do understand what you're saying, right? Because a lot of times I've had students that are very into studying idioms, and they're like they grab onto it, like that's the thing that I want to learn because that's gonna feel like that's gonna help them boost their language skills a lot more than they really do, right? I think I've told this story before, but I
love it. Tell it again.
So when I was in Japan, first we have to go all the way back to college. So in San Diego, I knew this Japanese guy. He was a college student, exchange student, and we were pretty good friends. We hung out sometimes, and then he left, and we kind of lost track. And then I went back to Japan, and randomly he drove by the school that I was teaching at during a recess when I happened to be outside, and he drove by and saw me, and like he kind of freaked out, and so he jumped out of the car, and I had gone back inside by the time he got out, and so he passed a note to another teacher like through the fence, and the note was something along the lines of, Brent, out of the blue I saw you when I was driving by, and I'm tickled pink to see you, and here's my number, please call me, right? Something like that. And so I'm sitting there going He's really trying to get these idioms in and kind of overdoing it a little bit. But he was trying, and that was connected to his interest in those things. But it was kind of like okay, when you overuse them, or when you get the, like you mentioned before, you get these kind of structures that are maybe beyond your regular grammatical ability, but they're tied into the idiom. So you get the prepositions in kind of more sophisticated forms, things like that. And so that can be a little bit of a place where, as a native English speaker, not as a teacher, but just as a native English speaker, and kind of imagining that I'm interacting with this person, and they're kind of, they're developing English, and then all of a sudden this like really gorgeous phrases or clear, like these abstract terms perfectly put together come in, then it can be a little, it's not wrong, but it's just kind of like, it throws you off somehow, like when someone is still developing, and then something comes out really well, right? It's the same thing as like when we get magical papers that are like suddenly perfect, right? And it's like, what happened? Where did that one come from, right? And so I can definitely see where there's a little bit of a balance here to figure out.
So, and I've had the opposite, not, I guess, a similar effect, but even with the more skilled students, let's say I've had interactions, for example, particularly overseas, where I've met someone who maybe is a it translates. They use their language skills to translate or to help people around that don't speak the language, and they're able to communicate. But then they also use so many idioms packed into something because they want to build rapport with that person. But rather than allowing that to help build depth and like a friendship or a relationship, it actually seems phony. And I know that the person's probably trying to say, hey, I understand these phrases that help you to recognize that that I can be in your in group. And I don't have a particular example, but I can think of several where I thought, oh my gosh, they're using them all appropriately, but an actual native speaker would not use so many within their speech, or especially if you're trying to make someone feel welcome or at ease, or trying to build a relation, like a connection.
That's super interesting, because I could see where that is like, so their goal, the way that they're doing it and their intention is kind of working against them, in the sense of what they're actually, their end goal is, to make friends, or to that, I like that point about being part of the in group, right? Because language, idiomatic expressions are a big part of being in an in group, right? And so students that kind of recognize that might try to use that as a way in to say like, hey, I could make friends.
It's like a little white flag saying, I'm a friend. You can talk to me. I can understand. I understand your pop culture references, and I understand this. But it's like what at my institution we call the students who you'll talk to them, and we call them Netflix, the Netflix students, or the street students, because they understand the pop culture references and they can fool you. But as soon as you start to talk, try to get any abstract language, they just only know idiomatic stuff that they learned from YouTube influencers or Netflix. And it's like, oh, there's actually no depth beyond that.
Okay, so question for you.
So it works.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about this, right, because there also needs to be a transition into using those things smoothly, right? So you can't just say, hey, don't use them until you're totally comfortable. Like, that's not really how we teach, right? I assume that's not how you teach. It's like, let's experiment with it. We're going to make mistakes inside of here, right? And then later it will hopefully balance out and become more natural. I'm not sure, though, if teachers are talking about this part, right? Like, don't overuse. I haven't had this conversation with other people, so I'm not totally sure, but like, don't overuse idioms, right? Don't, be careful, like, pay attention. I don't even know how to tell a student to pay attention to whether or not this is considered common or modern or fading,
No, that's a really good point because what I've started to do, because again, just because I don't use idioms myself doesn't mean I get to rob the students of an experience with language.
Mm-hmm.
They should be the ones choosing, and ultimately, they should be the ones experiencing with the language. I never really feel truly comfortable when I'm using idioms. And again, I just think, of course, I'm sure that some have snuck into my lexicon, but I just generally don't. And one of the things I've started doing just to be more understanding of and more inclusive of different ages, different geographical areas is I'll tell students when we're teaching something and then like content, whatever the content is, that topic, I'll say there are a few idioms that usually may show up in this context. Here's one, but the younger generation now is maybe using this one. And I don't use any of these, or this is the one that I'm comfortable with. And my mom or an older generation might say something like this. And I understand what they say, but I wouldn't use it. And so I start to give them the comparison of generations so that they understand too. And it happened recently where we were talking about idiomatic ways of saying that something is great. And of course, like that's cool, that's awesome, that's rad, that's dope, that's sick, that's lit. And so now you've got a whole span of generations, but I cannot have a 35-year-old saying, wow, that's lit.
That's on fleek. Is that even still around?
Oh my gosh, I forgot that one. And so yeah.
Well, sorry, because there is a point here too where you're talking about what is properly idiomatic versus what is like trending slang, right? And so some of these things you're gonna have to balance these things out too, right, in the conversations.
Well, we talked about spilling the beans, right? And because of spilling the beans, letting a secret out. Nowadays, because social media has taken influence on our intake of entertainment, now you have spill the tea. And that's what people say. Spill the tea means let out the secret. Like, who spilled the tea? Give me the tea.
Yeah.
And so again, it is changing. And that's now I had my students actually look it up to see when it entered the dictionary. And it was like 2 years ago. And it's about the time when it was the pandemic and most of us were at home. So we were taking more of our material from online sources, like our reading and our intake. And so there was more usage of that. And now that used to be slang, but now it's becoming like, I almost see it as a generational replacement for spill the beans.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another thing, like many of our idioms may have come from slang or slogans that they just became sayings and we understand them. And of course, those are maybe from social media, but we have the ones that are field specific or there's a lot of military idioms, as that quote said. And I guess my point here is using language that even native speakers don't relate to. And there was a conversation online, teachers, just not language teachers, but just a regular class where the students asked the teacher why they always said they were sounding like a broken record. And the students didn't understand what a record was. And now we joke about it, but it's really become like we're in an age where students didn't live through 9/11. They didn't live through not having a cell phone. They don't really know what a phone with buttons is or things that are corded. So yeah. So what is it for that student? What does it mean? What use is that?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so that just sparked the conversation. Teachers started sharing their experiences with Generation Z. And then that I felt so validated. And I was like, yes, finally you understand. So then I took that conversation over to Facebook and I had several colleagues. Eric Roth was one of them, Nina Ito, a couple of my colleagues, Ashley, and a couple of other people were giving their experiences on just their interaction with idioms. And some were very positive and some were like, yes, I understand. It's very confusing or very frustrating when someone's speaking. It's like you're having to figure out a puzzle. And so again, but I think what came out of that ultimately is that, and I think Eric Roth put it really nicely, and I think Steve McIsaac also mentioned that oftentimes, idioms could be exclusionary or inclusionary. It shows a shared experience. It shows history, your knowledge, and they actually add to the beauty and diversity of English, which is what, or of any language really, which is what we argue with, like, no, why should we be grammar sticklers? There's a beauty of language when things shift. It's alive. And so I think that my views, my extreme views on banning idioms have kicked the bucket. Can I say that? So, is that awkward? Is it weird?
I don't. Yeah. I mean, have you stopped? Have you stopped throwing chalk at the students who use idioms?
Oh, I'm totally fine if they use idioms, but I'll tell them, hey, a better idiom. Here, let me give you two more, and then you decide. And again, where I haven't stopped throwing chalk is my poor sister, and every time she leaves me a video message, I stop the video and I said, "Did you know that the idiom you just used came from this? Blah blah blah." And how did you learn that? Nobody loves that. I'm just wondering, how did you know? How did you know? No, she's traumatized because I used to correct her pronunciation when we were little. It's a sore topic.
Clearly. But this is kind of interesting though, because I was, as you're talking about all these things, I was thinking of, like, when I was growing up, and maybe I didn't understand idiomatic expressions that my mom said because they were from her generation, But I also think that there's value in understanding those things and saying, like, hey, this is an old idiom, and, like, it's fun and it's interesting. In the same way that I was talking about, like, in my studies of Japanese, like, you can also get a feeling of how my mom's still here and good, but, like,
people with different experiences,
right,
is
right.
Really what it is,
so,
right?
So like that thing, and then you can kind of get insights into the ways that those people see the world too. Now, you do have to have a pretty, sophisticated grasp on the language to really pull that out. But, like, I've had ones where, my mom, even still, there was one that she came up with, and it was like, something about, like, dancing with clay feet or something like that, and I'm like, I don't know that expression at all. And my mom was shocked.
Not dancing with two left feet.
No, not dancing with two left feet. It was something about, like, a clay feet something. Sorry, I didn't look it up before. It just kind of came up at the moment, but it was something along those lines. And we had an interesting conversation about it, because I'm like, I'd never heard it before, but she was shocked because it felt like, to her, it was so ingrained, it just came out of her mouth naturally, right? Like, she didn't think about it. She just kind of said it as something else. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? But I like those moments too, because you get to talk, you get to share, kind of understand a little bit more. Obviously, I forgot what the idiom was, so sorry, Mom. But in those moments, you get to share a little bit, and you get to see what's going on. So I think that there is another level of value. I am interested. I don't want to get too, like, social justice, formed here, but there are parts of these that are very, patriarchal.
They reflect, they reflect the society of that time. And I think, I was going to add something to that. I was going to say, so you're talking about sharing these moments with your mom. And of course, my mom communicates usually mostly in Spanish. She speaks English and everything. But there are certain idioms she uses in Spanish that will trigger memories of times in Mexico with my grandma. And then my sister and I will mimic the way the idiomatic language my grandmother used. And it's so endearing. But some of those things you would never, ever say because we just don't trade food anymore. We don't or for example, there's a couple where my sister and I was like, why does not my mom, I mean, why do people in Spanish say this all the time? It sounds so bad. And like you said, it reflects the society they grew up in and what they were taught. And I've had to tell a couple of my my aunt, oh, we don't say that anymore. Here's a
Mm.
better something you can say instead. And it's like, and they didn't realize it. It's just, and some of them could have racial undertones. Some of them, I haven't heard anything blatantly racist, but still, it's
Oh
not.
yeah, yeah. No, they can, or they could be like,
Or
they
a
could be
or
there, but we don't know that there's
right.
racist issues inside of there. So sometimes that'll come up, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll be like, oh my god, I had no idea that expression came from this
Yeah.
or something like that too. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely. It's tricky, right? Because I think all parts are interesting. Obviously, as linguists, we're interested, right, to know what things mean and
Mm-hmm.
how they connect with ideas. But I do understand, and I think that these days, because of social media and acceleration, right, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
more a faster push for change to get rid of ones that are, maybe harmful or maybe make people upset or something like that. But also, I have a little a slightly conservative take on it
A
too.
fondness.
Yeah, well, it's just that like all language communicates something, right? And so
Right.
there are ways, like they're interesting to see. Not to say that I'm supporting anything racist or
Mm-hmm.
sexist or whatever else
Oh
it
yeah, yeah.
is. That's not what
No,
I'm
and
trying to
yeah.
get to. But it is interesting to see, like, okay, this is the way that this group of people communicates these
Used to
ideas.
communicate. Right.
Because then it
Right.
also, like I said, it helps you maybe see ways that they want to view the world, or the ways that they maybe want to talk to you about things can open that up. Now, again, when we're coming back to our language learners, that is very complicated because it starts getting into
Mm-hmm.
very, very fine nuances. So I think you might have an argument for holding off on idioms until intermediate or above, right?
Right. And I think that's what the books that are written for language learners that are idiom books, they're usually, separated by topic or
Mm-hmm,
by category.
mm-hmm,
And I think that makes it a little bit more comprehensible for them. But you are required a certain level of English competency or language competency in order to be able to play with the language. Because what use is it learning it, but you can't play with it and try it out for yourself and then decide. And I think that's where I do agree. I think that my my bone to pick with people. Sorry, I had to think of it. My bone to pick with people is
if
is
anyone
when they're
listening
using.
can tell us the exact number of idioms that we've used in this episode, whether we are aware of it or unaware, you're going to get a free sticker sent through the mail. What a
Yeah,
win
so I mean,
for hours of just like picking through every word we said. Oh my gosh.
it's just with the lower level students being aware that they're learning survival English. So as soon as you give them something incomprehensible,
Mm,
they panic and then they see it as I'm not performing. My English isn't good enough. And it might be that no, that the person talking to you is just using very difficult language.
yeah.
So it's the same as if a student is using the word love versus a synonym of love, and that synonym is outdated. And I can't think of one at the moment. But like run versus walk versus jog versus stroll versus
Yeah.
um
Well, it's like, yeah, like saying like someone's the cat's
yeah.
pajamas, and it's like, it's like,
I don't even know what cat's pajamas. And I recently learned the bee's knees, but I don't even know
it's the
what
same,
it
the same meaning. The bee's knees means the cat's
Oh,
pajamas. It means
the
that
cat's pajamas.
you like
What does
someone a
that
lot.
mean?
You really
Uh,
like them. You think they're
but
great.
why?
Hmm?
But why cat and pajamas?
A cat in pajamas is wonderful.
But why? What's the association? What about? So you know the idiom, you know the meaning, but you don't know why. We'll see.
The history of it,
You
but
sound like
it
a
is
broken
always
record.
interesting to try and look
Yeah.
back and go see what the history can be, right? Yeah, but there's definitely tons of them that we
Mm-hmm.
don't know why we say them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's going to be are idioms appropriate? Maybe the answer is not so much for emerging learners, but more so
Mm-hmm.
for intermediate, upper intermediate, maybe even kind of intermediate and above, as
Where
you're
it's
getting into it.
fun and not frustrating, right?
Yeah.
Where it's more fun rather than frustrating.
Okay. So in all of this, I did look it up. Feet of Clay it means a fundamental flaw or weakness in a person otherwise revered. So maybe your feat of clay.
Was your mom criticizing your?
Your feat of clay is that you don't like idioms. Otherwise, you're revered.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And yours is your dancing?
I guess there wasn't dancing. Dancing wasn't a part of it. No, it wasn't.
No.
I wasn't like dancing in front of my mom, and she's like, "You've got feet of clay. Like your dancing is terrible." No. Sorry.
Oh my gosh.
I think the conversation was something different, and then she brought up the idiom "feet of clay," but now I don't remember the full context of it. I just remember it was clay feet. It was feet of clay, but yeah, there we go. So everybody walk away with that one. Please teach it to your students and see if they can use it naturally in their language.
All right, it is time for our fun finds. And today I have something that I found in Taiwan, but it's actually from Spain. And this is the Suwavina Lip Balm. They're little tubs of lip balm. It's about $3, but it's all made with essential oils. And there's no, there's not a lot of the chemical stuff. So you just put it on, doesn't feel greasy. The next morning, it has absorbent to your skin, and it just feels soft. So if you've got chapped lips, which I've had a bad case of recently, Suwavina Lip Balm from Spain.
All right, nice. So
what do you have?
Is a game. It's called Pando. Ooh. Pando. Have you heard of this?
Pando. I've heard of Panda.
Not Panda, Pando.
So tell us about Pando.
So this is a card game, and I was actually looking for this for class, like a game that we could play with my students and things like that. But it's also a family and fun games. So basically, what it does is it's a trivia game that. How well do the people that you're playing the game with, how well do those people know you, right? And so, it's like it asks questions, and most of them are kind of like yes no questions, but there might be a few other some variations, but you can play with it. So as I was getting into it, there's like lots of different language, right? So it said the questions might be things like, do I prefer boxers or brief? Or do I partake, I'm looking at the examples that are on the thing, right? Do I trust doctors? Do I prefer mayonnaise or Miracle Whip, right? And so it's kind of this question of like, how well do you know this person? And then you play the game, whatever the rules are. But the cool thing is like these questions are an opportunity to like get to know people better too, right? So if you're working with a class and you can, I like these games, these card games that have like big stacks of cards, because you can give different groups little sections of cards and then play with them. And then I thought that this one maybe the students don't know each other well enough to answer some of these questions, and I pulled out all the underwear questions for my own class. But,
of course you did. When it's not death, it's underwear.
So I those ones are not going to be involved in there, but they are kind of you can give guesses about them, and then the people can tell you if you're right or wrong, and then there's lots of opportunities to build language around these types of card games. So this one is called Pando, Pando. There's also a kids version of it. So there's a not safe for work version, cool. But there's also a kids version. So it's like depending on the level that you're wanting to work with and the language.
Diversity.
Yeah. So Pando is the game, and you can check it out. We have a link in the show notes for that as well.
Cool. As always, thanks for listening to the show. If you're giving us a shout out anyway, tag us on social media. Give us your best idiom, your least favorite idiom.
Oh yeah, if you can review the show,
I'd like to hear
with idioms
or that.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Let's get creative.
There's a challenge for you.
Yeah, review the show with idioms somehow. You could you could review it on social media. You can review it in the reviews places, whatever. But yeah, share what's your favorite idiom. That's what I want to know. I bet you people out there have some really good ones too. Because you know what I was thinking. I've always been jealous of the idiomatic language of like the Deep South, like that. There's all these cool terms in there, and I wish I could use those more naturally, like as part of my lexicon. I always thought that, but they're not really, they don't fit me, But they are cool. There are some interesting ones. Which is to say that we're on Patreon, we're on Buy Us a Coffee. If you want to support the show in any way, please do. You can go leave us reviews. That is one of the best ways for us that we appreciate. You can find the show notes for this
Share
episode.
the show. Share the show.
Share the show. Share the show. I wish you were doing
At
a dance.
DIESOL.org/82.
Thank you for taking over. DIESOL.org/82, and you can listen to us at Voice Ed Canada. That's voiced.ca. We're on the Twitters and some other places, many other places, but not exactly active everywhere. So shows at DIESOL Pod. I am at Brent G. Warner.
And I'm Ixchell at Ixie_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY.
Mm-hmm. In Burmese, thank you is Jizuwa. So, Jizuwa for tuning in to the DIESOL podcast. You shall stop laughing at my terrible Burmese.
Nobody's laughing.
You are covering your mouth and barely containing it. I dropped the ball on that one.